Texas Governor Rick Perry's been indicted for corruption and abuse of power, and if convicted, he could be facing up to 100 years in prison. Joining me now to explain what's happening with his governor's office is Ian Milhiser, editor of Think Progress Justice. Ian, it doesn't appear that Rick Perry's glasses have been doing him a lot of good lately. You know, it just seems like, every time he starts sounding like a statesman, something weird happens. And although I look at this charge, it's actually pretty weak where it comes to any kind of conviction. But it's just, nevertheless, it opens up some discussion about what's going on in Texas. How do you see it?
Yeah, what he did here is probably not going to get him convicted, but it's still sketchy. So the story here is that the Travis County District Attorney has an unusual amount of power because she can prosecute and investigate state-level officials. She oversees Austin, which is the state capital. And one of the investigations that her office was leading was into this state agency that provides grants for cancer research and cancer treatment that was accused of some self-dealing, including some grants that went to people who are close to Perry.
In other words, they followed the money. They saw that it wasn't that they were just close to Perry. They'd put money into the political campaign, and it looked like a quid pro quo was here. You're gonna get some grants from this organization because of that.
Right. There were allegations of corruption that
Right.
something was going on where this money was going to people because they were good to Rick Perry and not because they were necessarily the best people to get these grants. Where this gets interesting is last year, the district attorney, who's a Democrat in Travis County, was arrested and convicted of a really serious drunk driving charge. She was very, very drunk. And it looks like Perry used the fact that she's now been compromised to try to push her out. When she refused to step down, he has a line item veto power, and he used that to strip her funding for this public integrity unit that was investigating this allegation of corruption with the cancer agency. And so there's no angels here. You have a DA who was driving while drunk and actually served jail time for it. You have Perry, and it looks like he's trying to take advantage of the fact that she's been compromised, and he's using his power in a really heavy-handed way to try to take out this unit that was investigating potential corruption that touches upon him. There are no angels here.
I think you would agree, though, if you look at the two different charges. I mean, the first possibility of anything having any kind of impact is the grant issue, where grants given to people that had been given money to the governor, and did the governor influence those grants? That's more of a public integrity quid pro quo kind of corruption case. But he has a constitutional right on the second part of it, whereas he vetoed money that would have funded the public integrity group. And he has a lot of wiggle room on that, doesn't he?
That's right. Yeah, there's a serious constitutional problem with this indictment, and that's that the governor has, under the Constitution, discretion to decide what he wants to veto and what he doesn't want to veto. And, there's probably some limits that could be placed on that. If Perry were taking bribes, the legislature could probably make those bribes criminal if he was actually selling his veto. But, the separation of powers in Texas does say that Perry has a great deal of control over his veto, and the legislature can't take that away without amending the Constitution, because that would be changing the allocation of powers between the governor and the legislature. So I think it's likely that any charges related to his veto are going to be thrown out, because even though they're scuzzy doesn't make something illegal, and it doesn't make an indictment constitutional.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is you have to get to the intent. You've got to be able to say that his conduct, that there was criminal conduct that was intentional. And when the Constitution says you have a power, now we may not agree with that power, but the Constitution says you have a power to use veto when you think it's appropriate. It's your discretion. It's almost impossible to look behind that and say, gee whiz, I see intent here. I mean, that's where that one falls. But I'm not so sure about the first part of this. I'm not so sure that the first part is not a bigger problem when the digging starts. It seems to me, though, that the Republicans kind of have, it sounds like they're not exactly blessed with candidates that don't have this kind of hinkiness about I mean, you got Christie, he was going to be the guy. You got McDonald's going to be the guy. You have Perry's going to be. Either way you look at this, when you start looking at this, it starts raising issues probably that Perry would not want raised at this point. Don't you see that as a problem for him?
Potentially, yes. And I mean, that's why normally when an elected official misuses their power, the remedy, and it's generally a very effective one, is the electoral process. Perry's made no secret about the fact that he wants to be president. And I think that voters, including voters in the GOP primary, are going to take this into account. He doesn't have to be convicted of a crime. He doesn't necessarily even have to have committed a crime for voters to say, I'm looking at this and this doesn't give me a lot of confidence in his leadership. So it could hurt him even if he's not convicted.
Well, if you're a prosecutor, probably what you're looking at is this. You're saying, okay, this is one instance of his use of a veto power. But what about where we go back and we look at a course of conduct? We look at, did he use this veto or that veto, for example, to help a wealthy donor? Was there some veto process that you can look at in a little more detail and find all of a sudden we do see some intent? And that's what he really should worry about, because obviously this prosecutor is committed to looking into this. This is the same office that went after Tom DeLay. They did it aggressively. They did it appropriately. Of course, the appellate court in Texas took that away because everybody knew that was going to happen. But this is a lot of light being shined on that use of the veto power, isn't it?
I mean, there's light being shined here. Now, this indictment doesn't name some other veto. It names this one veto.
Right.
I think we should emphasize how challenging it's going to be for this prosecutor to prosecute Perry for any veto. I mean, even if he had some sort of nefarious intent, absent an actual bribe, I think it's going to be very hard to show that. Yeah,
intent is very difficult in a case like that.
Right.
Ian, good story. We'll keep up with it. I'll have you back on, and we'll see how this thing progresses. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Thank you.